What do you think of the place? I've been doing a small bit of redecorating. I think it looks good. Like, I really like the window at the back. It's got a great view, and I have the pin-up of Ahsoka, which is very, Anyway. Critiquing media is a hobby of mine, if you couldn't tell. I really love digging deep into the understanding of the craft behind storytelling, and why well-written stories impact the audience in a positive way. When we discuss the craft of a media, such as a movie or TV show, something which has been a consistent annoyance is what I call the sacred cow. A sacred cow is an idiom used to figuratively describe something which is considered immune or above criticism. And I think that this definition can definitely be applied to media, because it's something which I have noticed across media criticism. I very much doubt I am the first one to notice this pattern. It applies to people who defended The Last Jedi, Zack Snyders films, Ghostbusters 2016, Life is Strange, Last of Us 2, Captain Marvel, and an assortment of other bad media. Now, I am not saying that anyone who disagrees with me has a sacred cow or some kind of bias. It is more specifically referencing how they go about defending this media, which I do define as sacred cow. Someone defending their sacred cow doesn't even necessarily need to be a bad media, but it is someone who could not accept any kind of criticism of a certain media, mostly because of an emotional connection and how they have tied themselves to that media, to a point where they cannot accept any criticism. And all this is often tied to the misconception that enjoyment and quality are the same thing. They are not, but I will explain further upon that later. There are different ways something can become a sacred cow, but the outcome and the logic path is pretty much the same. The more common way something becomes a sacred cow is usually through a perfectly normal love for a media. This could be because of nostalgia, could be part of an existing IP which you have already tied yourself to, or you could just really like this film. Again, this media doesn't even necessarily need to be bad for it to become a sacred cow, and something which I don't think a lot of people notice is that a lot of people at some point have probably had a sacred cow. In fact, I would go even further than that. I would say most people probably still do. I also wouldn't dismiss that you, watching at home, is very likely to have a media which you cannot accept any criticism of. It might not even be obvious to you what that is exactly. And this is perfectly normal to want to defend the media you like as good. You just need to make sure that you're open-minded to the criticism, especially if they are valid. Dying on a hill arguing against a valid criticism only damages your arguments going forwards. If you cannot accept a valid criticism, then your judgment is deemed as bias and likely to be clouded when it comes to other criticisms. It also makes it harder for you to argue against criticisms which may not even be valid. My personal sacred cow for a long time was Star Wars The Clone Wars. I grew up with that show. I could not accept any criticism of it up until more recently, where I recognised that I was very much letting my bias get in the way, and I saw that there were lots of flaws in the show, and even started openly criticising it. I do not believe the show to be of poor quality, but there are certainly a hell of a lot of valid criticisms which I do believe need to be addressed. Does that mean I in any way stop enjoying the Clone Wars? Hell no. I still bloody love it, because enjoyment and quality are very much separate. Another bias which can lead to a sacred cow is also a political bias, usually from someone who has heavily tied themselves to their own politics. Because a movie aligns itself with your politics and it ticks all the right boxes, you want to defend that media as good, despite the fact your politics has nothing to do with any kind of criteria which you should use to judge the quality of writing by. These films are usually your Ghostbusters 2016 and Captain Marvel. The political bias is usually more likely to lead down to the road of specific accusations of you being racist or sexist. These accusations are within themselves dismissals, which is exactly the kind of tactic which is extremely common with sacred cows. Either way, when you have a sacred cow, you will do anything at all to protect your media from criticism. When people critique media at all, it will often be taken as a personal attack to the person which has the sacred cow, who will quickly become upset about the criticism of the media which they have tied themselves to. This is the path that almost all sacred cows usually take. The conversation will probably start a lot more fair and tame, nothing more than your common discussion, but as the conversation goes on, the excuses will be fairly common as a way to excuse a lot of the criticisms being levelled. Stop me if you heard these before. The studio didn't have enough time. There was no other way it could have happened. You are wrong because of this third-party material, or they can even just straight up start using headcanon to fill in the gaps left by the media. A lot of that has happened with a lot of sacred cows. If this conversation continues and you do not accept any of the excuses being put forward, it will start to lead into the dismissals. This usually leans into suggesting that you have some kind of bias against the media, or you simply lack some kind of understanding. You are a Disney puppet, you're just racist and sexist. You just hate it because it isn't what you wanted. You just don't like change. You are just a hater. You do not understand the themes. Dismissals are specifically designed to dismiss your arguments without actually proving them to be false. There is a bit of an overlap between excuses and dismissals. However, I define the excuses more specifically as arguments which try to get you to overlook or forgive the issues without actually making the criticisms invalid. It still ends up being true. The overlap with the mix of dismissal and excuse will usually be something like this. Your problems will be solved in the later media. This excuse was specifically encountered in conversations about The Force Awakens, with how the hell Rey was so goddamn powerful, and about Zack Snyders' Superman, and why the hell he does not act like Superman. Fair to say, the later media did not really fix upon the problems of the original criticisms, and even if it did, it still wouldn't have fixed the original media which the criticism was addressed to. After the dismissals further devolve the conversation, it will lead into more hostile interaction with straight up insults, and the person who has the sacred cow will usually be extremely upset at this point. There is a lot of mixing of the insults and dismissals, like the accusations of racism and sexism, or when people start shouting that you're just a hater. These interactions can be very varied in their pacing. Some can be straight up hostile immediately to the person making the criticism, but depends upon the context of the situation mostly, and it very much depends upon how strong this sacred cow is with the individual. But no matter what, a person with a sacred cow will never ever let go of the idea that their media is perfect and flawless. My advice towards people who do have sacred cows is that if you really want to defend the media that you like as good, you need to be able to accept the valid criticisms and try to remain as unbiased as possible, while doing your best to remain level-headed and to not get upset. It's best to understand that enjoyment of a media and its quality are not the same thing. The difference between quality and enjoyment is that enjoyment is nothing more than how you felt, while the quality is more specifically referring to the craft of that media, how internally consistent it is, how well they characterize their characters, the pacing of their story, their editing. Those are just a few examples. You can like something which is poorly written, and you can not enjoy something which is well written. I personally am not a big fan of Lord of the Rings, but I know that is just because of my subjective bias, and Lord of the Rings is actually incredibly well written, and I will even defend the Eagles not being a plot hole. A good personal example of media that I really enjoy but I do not believe to be of quality is Venom and Shazam. A quick example of some of my criticisms: Venom changed from being a villain to an anti-hero on a dime, while Shazam and how they characterize him as Billy is completely different to how they characterize him as an adult, even though it's his mind in an adult's body. maybe I'll just reiterate it again. You do not need to defend the media you love as being flawless and above criticism, because these criticisms do not mean that you need to enjoy the media any less than you already do. The annoying part is that you can say this explicitly and people will still accuse you of trying to take away their enjoyment. It makes no sense. And this is all because they take your criticism as a personal attack. And it gets annoying because people are upset at the mere idea that a media they care about has a single flaw. It shuts down any kind of discussion. How can you have a conversation with someone if they're just immediately going to be upset and start yelling at you? Not being able to accept criticism is really unhealthy. It's not a good way to live your life. Hell, that is exactly what has gotten us into the situation with media criticism. People just drop any kind of standards when it applies to something they like, and there are so many people, specifically YouTubers, who have made past criticism towards one media, but then, when the exact same criticism is made against something they enjoy, they get upset about it. Who would ever do that? And the fact you thought of someone kind of proves how widespread this is. I hope I explained this topic well enough in this video so it's a lot easier for people to identify it, both in themselves and in people around them. And if you do see this in yourself, then I do hope this helps you become more accepting of people's criticisms when it comes to a media you like. That is just what I'm hoping. As you can imagine, creating a setup like this isn't cheap or easy, that mind. It's something which requires a lot of time and money, and if you do want to support this channel through Patreon or Streamlabs donations, I very much appreciate the support. For those of you who are interested in keeping up to date with me and what's going on, my Discord and Twitter are in the description. I hang in there often and I have fun with everyone there. I also show updates, my videos and their progress, so if I have another break of about 2 months, oops, you get to see what you're looking forward to when I next upload. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and this is Shiny, signing off.